Oh, hello, hello. Are we live? I wonder if I can ever do a live stream that doesn't begin with me saying, "Are we live?" Hello, everyone. Yes, we're open. Awesome. Hello, hello. Come in, come in. Okay, so I think I'm going to wait for people to come in, get a bit more viewers. So while we're waiting for people to stream into the live stream, I'm going to have a quick chat about where I've been. Also, let me know if my audio is good and all that stuff. So in terms of where I've been, I took a little break, and the little break after House of the Dragon, the little break turned into a slightly larger break, and then I started working on a secret new video. So I haven't revealed it yet, but I might as well reveal it now. My patrons know. I'll let you guys know. The next official animated Song of Ice and Fire video I'll be doing is going through every single Valyrian steel item, every Valyrian steel weapon explained. Although it won't just be weapons, it'll be all kind of, things and trinkets and bits of armor and so on. So yeah, that'll be coming out this week, I promise you. This week will be Valyrian steel. Then after that, I will be working on my 50k special, 50k sub special, right? The whole, the dumb Song of Ice and Fire cookbook video. And then of course, the long-awaited Every Fray Explained, where I'm going to break down over 100 frays in animated fashion, because I'm insane. Okay, yeah, so that's where I've been, and that's what I'm currently doing. By the way, I'm in the process of animating it. So this isn't early on. I've done the audio, I've done the art, I've done the script, I've done everything. I'm just going to be, I'm making my way. I've got all the assets down. I'm like a minute into animation out of 13, so there we go. Right, now that we've got that stuff out of the way, I'm back, here to stay, new videos. We've got enough people in. Let's have a look. Yeah, we've got 40 odd people in. Let's have a chat about what this video is going to be. So I wanted to do something a bit experimental here. I wanted to do a sort of reaction video to a video that was released. It's got over 100k views, so it's called Morally Grey Fantasy. It was released by Sargon of Akkad, who's a I don't want to mischaracterize him, conservative leaning YouTuber. And the concept of, I guess, there's been a lot of debate recently online about morally grey fantasy and morally grey fiction, and the idea of subverting tropes and deconstructing genres and nihilism, issues of good and evil. People have been throwing things around in terms of, are we seeing an oversaturation of deconstruction and subversion and moral greyness in genre fiction like sci-fi, fantasy, and so on? So yeah, all that stuff has been quite interesting. And I will say, Company of the Cat, shout out to the Song of Ice and Fire YouTuber Company of the Cat, released a really awesome video a couple of days ago. Specifically, it's called something like Nihilism versus Romanticism, basically debunking the concept that A Song of Ice and Fire is nihilistic, and arguing that it is in fact romantic with a capital R. So this video popped up in my recommended, Morally Grey Fantasy. I haven't watched it properly. I looked at the comments, and the comments seem to suggest that Sargon goes on to talk about both Tolkien and Martin. So I thought, okay, cool, that could be fun to look at, especially the Martin section. So I skimmed through it, but I want to do my proper first watch along with you guys. So the first half of him is him talking about Rings of Power and Tolkien, then he goes on to George R. R. Martin. And I guess, what's the point of this video? Well, one, I think it's an interesting topic, and two, I just kind of want to do something different, because, YouTube really is filled with like rage bait and trolling and sort of, negativity and cynicism. And I just thought, you know what? Let's have a respectful response, right? Let's do a video where let's do a live stream where we respond to a video, and we're just being polite and respectful. No character assassination, no insults or anything. We're just gonna analyze, break down what Sargon has to say, see if we agree, see if we disagree. And this doesn't apply to you, by the way, chat. You're free agents, you can say whatever you want. But for me, I want to be respectful. Yeah, just 'cause it's a political YouTuber, so naturally I imagine this will be a controversial video. It'll probably be the only video of this kind I do, but I thought it would be quite fun. So yes, Morally Grey Fantasy, let's see what this is about. Like I said, I've only skimmed it, so I think now's a good time to... Yeah, we got 60 odd viewers. Now's a good time to begin. So let's start. Gotta make sure the audio's all good.
Unlike most people, I've been laboriously slogging through Amazon's The Rings of Power, and like the rest of this very narrow cohort, I found it remarkable.
Okay, so just straight off the bat, have to clarify something. I haven't seen Rings of Power. I saw some people panicking in the chat, saying, don't defend Rings of Power. Hey, I've not seen it. I do want to see it. I'm just too scared to see it because of everything I've heard. Yeah, no, I've heard bad things about Season 1. I've heard bad things about Season 2. Quite collectively. Yeah, everyone seems to be united in disliking Rings of Power. So I'm interested in what he has to say about Tolkien and all that stuff. In terms of Rings of Power, I have nothing to say about it because I haven't watched it. So I won't defend it. I'm not going to criticize it. I don't know. I haven't seen it. In terms of Tolkien in general, by the way, I read Lord of the Rings when I was a kid. I was too young to understand a lot of it. And I watched the films, and I love the films. So I'm not... Like, I'm super into Song of Ice and Fire and George R. R. Martin, but Tolkien stuff, I need to get up on that. I've recently bought the Silmarillion, so I want to do a proper set-aside time, Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion, all that stuff. Really leap into the legendarium, and... because he's the granddaddy of fantasy, right? But, yeah. Anyway, let's continue. I'll try not to interrupt the video too often.
How profoundly rubbish it is. Almost every aspect of it is terrible. The costumes, the sets, the storyline, the events, the pacing, the actors themselves, the special effects, the motivations of the heroes and villains, and their characterizations. Literally, all of it is just bad.
I will say, what little I've seen of Rings of Power, especially compared to House of the Dragon, especially compared to like the costume design and the production design and the special effects of House of the Dragon, everything feels so real and lived in and gritty. And clips I've seen of Rings of Power, it kind of looks... It looks simultaneously really expensive and really cheap. Is the video a bit too loud? Okay, I'll turn the video down a little bit. Simultaneously, yeah, really expensive and really cheap. It does look kind of weird. I also think I'm going to speed this up to 2, just so that I'm not like silently watching this, waiting for a proper point to emerge to then respond to. So, times 2 speed.
It did throw up something quite interesting, though, which was in the fact that it was written by John Payne and Patrick McKay, a screenwriting duo of absolutely no note, who spent their entire careers failing upwards until somehow Amazon decided that they ought to be given $500 million plus and the keys to the Tolkien estate. As Rotten Tomato pointed out in their write-up of them when this project was announced, you've probably never heard of them, because prior to this they had 3 uncredited stints writing for forgettable properties. It came as something...
Someone's saying, I need louder audio for myself. Okay, so... Right. Am I a bit quiet? Is my audio a bit quiet? I'll turn it up ever so slightly. Okay. I've turned it up a little bit. Maybe I'm just talking quietly, but there we go. Okay,
A surprise to Tolkien fans, then, to find out that this got a season 2, and that in the first episode of that season, we saw...
Okay, so regarding the 2 showrunners, I had heard that there were 2 showrunners who had barely any experience. Wait, hold on a sec.
For forgettable properties. It came as...
someone's saying slow it down a bit. There we go.
Something of a surprise to Tolkien fans, then, to find out that this...
1.5 speed. Okay. My ADHD brain is like, gotta go fast, but there we go.
Got a season 2. And that in the first episode of that season, we saw an...
Wait. Where was the...
Surprise to Tolkien fans, then, to find out that this got a season 2.
Oh, there we go. The film... So, the people who are the showrunners for The Rings of Power... Star Trek Beyond, which I haven't seen. Godzilla vs. Kong, which I may have seen. That could have just been a fever dream, though. And then Jungle Cruise, which is one of the myriad of movies involving The Rock in a jungle playing himself. Yeah, see, here's the thing with Hollywood. There does seem to be a sort of, especially modern Hollywood, there does seem to be a sort of a crisis of incompetence where people fail upwards and people seem to get hired despite either having no experience or having actively bad experience working on bad projects. The most obvious example to me would be Lauren Hisrinch, the showrunner for The Witcher. So what has Lauren done in the past, right? So previously, I think did some episodes of The West Wing or something, but the first proper role as showrunner, right, in terms of, that was the Defenders series on Netflix, which are bringing together Daredevil, Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, right? And I loved the Netflix Daredevil, those seasons. Amazing, incredible. Lauren Hisrich took over The Defender and is terrible. It's one of the most boring things I've ever seen. And it was kind of panned for being boring. And so naturally, Netflix rewarded her for writing a boring TV show by giving her the Witcher IP, the IP of an immensely popular Polish fantasy series and a multi-billion-dollar gaming IP. And they gave it to her, and I think she said her first response in an interview, she said her first response was to reject it, saying, I'm not the right person for this, I'm not as into the source material, and Netflix just pushed it, and she went, okay, I'll do it anyway. And that show is terrible, and it shows, right? Because you have the wrong, it's incompetently written, incompetently managed in every way. It's awful. And why is Lauren Hisrich able to go from failure to failure like this? Well, she's married to a producer. That's another big thing with Hollywood. It's all about nepotism. You have to be married to the right person, or dating the right person, or you need to be the child of the right people, or you need to be the parents of the right people, or the uncle, or the brother, or the cousin. It's all this kind of insular, incestuous, extended family that fail their way upwards a lot of the time. And it's all about who you know and what secrets you have and stuff like that. In terms of breaking in from the outside, it's extremely hard. Because it's I don't want to go too much into it, but there's definitely some kind of weird incompetence crisis, as I'd call it. You seem to see it everywhere. Just the wrong people being hired, the wrong people being promoted, all that stuff. It's really weird. So why would they hire two no-names who have done who had uncredited writing roles on 3 blockbuster movies that are kind of, I think, all known for probably being kind of shit. I don't know about Star Trek Beyond, but Godzilla vs. Kong, Jungle Cruise, I know they're considered schlock, right? They're considered schlock. So why would you then give them something as big as the Lord of the Rings IP? Why would you give Lauren Hisrich something as big as the Witcher IP? I don't know. Although, to be fair, Benioff and Weiss had barely done anything when they were given Game of Thrones, when they pitched Game of Thrones, and then that show was immensely successful critically and commercially for HBO, at least critically, at least for the first half of the entire show. But maybe it's just a case of studios being like, let's bite the bullet, let's get some smaller names who are easier to control, because if we get big names, then they might be auteurs, they might do their own thing. Whereas if we get a couple of no names, then the studio won't face any pushback, because Rings of Power is probably one of those shows where the suits are controlling every tiny thing. But again, I'm being unfair because I haven't myself seen the show. I've just heard a load of bad stuff about it. So someone in the chat saying the gaming industry is no different. Maybe. Anyway, let's continue.
Writing for forgettable properties. It came as something of a surprise to Tolkien fans then to find out that this got a season 2, and that in the first episode of that season we saw an orc family for the first time in Lord of the Rings.
So this is the big controversy I've heard about the orc family, so let's see what Sargon has to say about it.
And progressive media outlets kicked into overdrive to let us know that, yes, bigot, Tolkien did actually say that orcs reproduce, and therefore an orc family is technically a valid concept within the universe. Tolkien, as you are doubtless aware, wrote the orcs to be a race of violent, cruel, deceptive brutes.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys!
I very recently rewatched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, literally last month. It was one of my post House of the Dragon, when I had a couple of weeks off. One of those weeks I just binged Lord of the Rings with some pizza. It was awesome. I always love the line, looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. the idea that orcs understand what a menu is. The fact that orcs have a menu in Mordor, little black menu, white writing, a bunch of themed cocktails and foods. I'm just checking the chat. Okay.
Though canonically the origins of the orcs is somewhat murky, as Tolkien never gave a single consistent answer as to their origin, the general view appears to be that they are elves and men who are corrupted by the evil god Morgoth somewhere in the distant past, and then enslaved to be his thralls.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not super deep into Tolkien lore. That's what I've heard, is the orcs are meant to be... I'm sure Tolkien fans can help me in the chat. That's kind of why I wanted to do this live stream, because I wanted to see other people's opinions and maybe correcting any mistakes in this video, correcting any mistakes I make. So let me know, chat. I'm always going to be checking. Orcs are elves corrupted by Morgoth, and then in Lord of the Rings, at least this is what the film said, the Uruk-hai in Isengard were created from breeding orcs with goblins Is that the same thing in the books? Yeah, someone says, do orcs have restaurants? Exactly. Meat's back on the menu. They've got a menu and like every option is just meat.
In an unpublished note, which was later published after his death by his son under a collection entitled Myths Transformed, Tolkien had said, quote, that even before this wickedness of Morgoth was suspected, the wise in the elder days taught always that the orcs were not made by Melkor, and therefore were not in their origin evil. They might have become irredeemable, at least by elves and men, but they remained within the law. That is, though of necessity being the fingers of the hand of Morgoth, they must be fought with the utmost severity, they must not be dealt with in their own terms of cruelty and treachery. Many progressive Tolkien fans have taken this to mean that it is not necessary nor inevitable that the orcs are evil, and that perhaps that might mean that some orcs might be morally redeemable at some point. But as we can see, Tolkien implies that it was the great power of Morgoth that twisted them into their evil nature, and therefore it would take a great power to redeem them, putting it beyond the power of elves and men.
Mink in the chat says, I want an orc version of the bear. Every episode they're just cooking meat. No, it's not specified what the meat is. Like some days it's like a big chunk of pork, other days it's beef, sometimes it's some scrawny chickens. Occasionally you see like a hobbit leg sticking out of the soup.
Means is that they are contingently irredeemable, that is, always evil by the standards of elves and men, because these races do not have the power to make it otherwise. We of course already knew this to be the case, because they were made evil by Morgoth. It wasn't necessary or inevitable, it was his action that created them, and it is beyond the power of elves or men to undo. Therefore, elves and men, as Tolkien tells us, have only one option to deal with the inveterately evil orcs, which is to destroy them. And it's not like this was some kind of hidden message in Lord of the Rings. In the core material, Tolkien was pretty clear that the orcs are a villainous race, and killing them is not morally complex. So what did our dynamic duo take from Tolkien's work? Well, in a recent interview with Deadline, they were asked...
I don't know, on one hand, I want to wait for Sargon to make a specific point before I respond, but I also don't just want the video to be playing without me saying anything, because that's not really transformative. So, like I said, I've skimmed this, I haven't probably watched it. What I'm guessing his point is going to be is that trying to... it's foolish to try and transform something like the Lord of the Rings into something that's more grounded, and that involves, taking what's meant to be just a very simple evil army of bad guys to be defeated who represent villainy and evil, to twist them into sympathetic beings for the sake of subverting the viewer's expectations of what orcs are, is misunderstanding the point of Tolkien. That's what I think he's going to say, but let's see.
About their humanization of the orcs, and Payne says this: from the beginning of the season, we talked about the idea of having an arc, and we feel like this goes straight back to Tolkien. You read the books, and you get these blips of moments where orcs are kind of on their own, and they're saying, hey, what if one day there could be a place just for us? We could have our own little land, our own little cottage by the sea, so to speak, where they have dreams, they have aspirations. They don't want to just be mindless killing machines. We tried to take that a step further, and to continue to individuate them, and dramatize what their desires and ambitions might be. And McKay added, villains are motivated by things that are in their own heads that make them feel like they're the hero of their own story, and that can make for really compelling drama, and so orcs who have dimension, who have things they care about, benefits all the stories in our mind. This is a fascinatingly mediocre insight into the world of Middle-earth that displays the kind of wrinkle-free comprehension of what morality even is. The orcs, as Tolkien shows us, are not by any means mindless or even stupid. They are evil. They aren't stormtroopers, who are basically normal people mistakenly fighting for a villain, and they don't wistfully pine for home. They delight in war, torture, pain, suffering, and the advancement of misery. We would call them selfish and sadistic. If we were to take a utilitarian perspective on the worldview of the orc and say that anything that advances their own pleasure is morally good, then villainy is how an orc is moral. By our standards then, the orcs are fundamentally evil, and they act that way to one another. They're only cowed by fear of a greater power, and not by concerns of the suffering of others.
So yeah, I think the point he's making is that treating orcs and men as the same, right, as kind of just two different factions, as opposed to one force that's capable of good versus a force that is inherently evil, ignores the sort of mythological nature of what Lord of the Rings is. It's not a grounded story. It is this large mythological legendarium that tells a story of good versus evil. It's not grounded. It's not realistic. It's meant to be inspirational. And therefore there is no issue with treating a made-up fantasy race of creatures as being inherently evil within the context of what the Lord of the Rings is, and trying to change that is misunderstanding the point of them and misunderstanding what Tolkien was trying to do with these mythological stories, I guess. Yeah, I'd say I agree with that. Someone in the chat saying Lord of the Rings is a fairy tale. See, it's funny when you say fairy tale, it's almost because of Disney, the phrase fairy tale sort of been diluted, and it would almost feel like an insult. But I don't think it is an insult. It is something of a fairy tale. It is a very simplistic moral story, and it's designed that way because it's meant to be inspirational. It's meant to be classic. It's meant to be timeless. However, it's not 100% simplistic, right? There are shades of grey within Lord of the Rings. Again, I don't remember the books because I was a kid when I read them, but based on the movie, yeah, there are shades of grey in terms of certain characters in Rohan and Gondor and how they interact with each other and so on.
They're creatures of hate, greed, torment, and cruelty. They are the embodiment of vice, and their viciousness is what makes them what they are. This is
so. Just to go back, what the writers were saying is that they think it makes for good drama. It makes for good drama for villains to have understandable motivations and to be complex, which is true. Like, objectively, that is true. That's what we like to see in fiction. But I guess the argument against that is that doesn't belong with orcs. That doesn't belong with something like orcs within a Tolkien adaptation. No one wants to see morally complex orcs, and there's drama to be derived elsewhere. And if you want to do a series that subverts expectations about an inherently evil race, you do that in a different series, not in an adaptation of Tolkien, because in a way, I guess, the argument would be that you're changing his goals and disrespecting him or besmirching him in some way.
not just an aesthetic affectation. The consequences of living this kind of life are substantively different from the consequences of living a virtuous life, which is why the orcs are so ugly and disgusting, and why the elves are so beautiful and good. What kind of family life ought we expect an orc to have then? Orcs do not like one another, and turn on each other at the slightest provocation, so it's hard to believe that orc pairings would have a bond built on fidelity. Orcs are incapable of love. They are only capable of craving, and so it seems that they would have no reason to commit to one another, and would engage in physical union for the sake of the pleasure it provides alone.
That's a lovely image. I like to think of orcs breeding at 5 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Orcs wouldn't form families but broods, in which males would not know nor care which children were their own, and do nothing to take care of them. The biggest members of the tribe would get the lion's share of the food, with the smallest skittering fearfully around the edges to make sure they aren't in range of abuse. The attrition rate for orc children must be phenomenal, given
You know what, I've recently bought the I've been getting into Warhammer 40k recently. Oh, and by the way, definitely going to be doing some animated Warhammer 40k videos in the future. Not sure when, but I'd like to do that. But I was recently reading the Orc Codex, and it talks about the Goth clan of the orcs, and it says that their attrition rate is what was the phrase? Apocalyptic. That made me laugh out loud. Their attrition rate is apocalyptic, just because of how brutal they are to each other and how incompetent they are and so on.
the high levels of casual violence they exhibit towards one another. And this is what made a recent viral tweet by Nerdrotics so funny. Orcs just want a safe place to raise their kids, be evil, and practice their corrupted form of life in peace, as if they're the moral equals of men and basically just want the same things, only dressed in different attire. The very nature of displaying orc families like this raises valid questions about the setting's own internal contradictions, such as, why is no orc ever in clean clothing? Why does a loving family produce bloodthirsty offspring? Why are the orcs portrayed as irredeemably evil elsewhere in the Rings of Power? The fundamentals of a virtuous and loving family unit are completely absent in every aspect of this orc family, and yet we are expected to pretend as if one way of life is the equal to the other. And it's
So again, I haven't seen Rings of Power, but they have. Sounds like they portray the orcs as in the Peter Jackson movies, where they are kind of gross, green-skinned creatures with sharp teeth, and they're brutal bandits and all that stuff. But taking that inspiration from the Jackson movies, but at the same time they want to have their cake and eat it too by showing an orc family, showing a loving orc family, to imply that there's some nuance and depth, but it doesn't fit. Sargon saying it doesn't fit within the internal consistency, of this universe that they themselves are presenting, because it's like, well, how can they be these inherently evil, grotesque creatures we show in the rest of this TV show, but then we're going to throw this in. I guess maybe it's cheap. Maybe it's considered a cheap scene. Like a kind of a lazy way of being like, haha, our show is far more nuanced and complex than you thought. But it doesn't fit within the eternal consistency. This is, again, the second part of this video is the one because I saw that he talked about George R. R. Martin. I was like, okay, I want to watch this live with people on YouTube, with my boys, with my fans. So I don't have as much to say about this just because I haven't watched Rings of Power. So a lot of what I'm saying is, I guess the argument is this versus this because I haven't seen it. So yeah, the juicier stuff I think in this live stream will be whatever he has to say about George R. R. Martin. I don't know if he's a fan of Game of Thrones, if he's a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, whether he likes it, dislikes it, whatever. So that'd be interesting to see. But let's continue this, shall we?
Throws up even more problems about the orcs that Rings of Power will not be able to resolve. If the orcs are fundamentally good, but in conflict with humans over, say, the same resources, then it would imply an unheroic diplomatic solution is not only possible, but desirable. Moreover, the conflict therefore does not become one of morals, but one of skill. It becomes a question of not who is more worthy, but who is more tactical, and the moral dimension to the entire story is completely lost.
That's interesting, because there are often theories about the others. Right, bringing it back to A Song of Ice and Fire. The others, the White Walkers, that there might be some kind of pact, some kind of peace deal. So, probably some kind of final battles, but then some kind of negotiation as well. Jon Snow and the book equivalent of the Night King, who obviously doesn't exist in the books. But yeah, I guess if there is a negotiation, to build upon Sargon's point, if there is a negotiation, then you'd have to portray it in a way that doesn't just come across as a triumph of skill, like skill of diplomacy and intelligence over triumph of, traditional values of courage and goodness against evil. Because at least in the TV show, the others represent pure evil. In the books, it's hard to talk about because we don't know, but if the show is, if D&D properly went along with what George told them, with regards to the White Walkers, then yeah, they are just death. They are just destruction. Their entire goal is to march through Westeros, kill everyone, and then resurrect them as zombies, and then rule over them for all of time or whatever. So they are a force of death that is being fought against by the forces of life and civilization and hope and all that stuff. So I do wonder what the plan is, because is it as simple as a big battle? The living versus the dead, like the Battle of Winterfell in Game of Thrones? Is it that simple? And if there is negotiation, diplomacy, more nuance involved, how do you ensure that it's a moral victory for the side of life and not just a sort of skill-based diplomatic victory? And do you even do that? Again, with 2 books remaining, it's hard to talk about that kind of stuff. Yeah, anyway, but we're not on Song of Ice and Fire yet, so let's continue.
It also implies that their enemies are actually just like us, made from the same stuff as us, driven by the same motives as us, which Tolkien informs us is just not true. They are substantively different morally because of Morgoth's interventions. However, the liberal brainiacs who wrote this series can't accept that 2 races of rational creatures could be fundamentally different on a moral level, because frankly, they'd find it racist.
Libtard's destroyed with facts and logic. I don't know, I haven't seen any rhetoric about whether people consider Tolkien's interpretation of that interpretation, it's his story, whether Tolkien's portrayal of the orcs as being an inherently evil group of people, their own race, whether that's considered, whether some people see that as racist. I'd be surprised if they do, because that's completely misunderstanding what the orcs are and what Tolkien's going for there. I guess some people may present it that way, but excuse me. Sorry, got something caught my throat. But what's he? Is Sargon implying that's one of the motivating factors for why the writers decided to include sympathetic orcs? That the very concept of an inherently evil race is racist if you are, let's say, a liberal, as he said, who doesn't understand what Tolkien's doing with a mythological good versus evil fairy tale. I don't know. I'd have to look at more interviews and what they've said behind the scenes. I will say there's certainly, you see this a lot when shows come out. There's an attempt to kind of push, as much as people complain about shows pushing politics on them, people like to push their politics or what they think a writer's politics are on their work, on their art, even if there's a simpler explanation, right? So are orcs being made sympathetic for some kind of political reason, or is it just the writers don't understand Tolkien and are a bit incompetent? I would put my money on incompetence every single time. Occam's razor. Go with the simplest explanation. Yeah, sorry, Mexican orcs. Sorry, what? I was busy. I was deep in my thoughts, deep in my head. What is this?
They'd end up like modern Dungeons and Dragons, declaring that orcs are actually not evil, and are just another kind of human, living an otherwise normal human life. This would become then a way for the liberal to...
Wait. So obviously orcs in different mediums are generally the one thing they share is, they're usually portrayed as green skin, pointy ears, big tusks, and they're quite brutal, right? But they're different in every fantasy setting. So like an orc in 40k, not the same as an orc in Tolkien. It's not the same as an orc in the Elder Scrolls, right? Who are like orcs in 40k are inherently warlike and violent. Orcs in Tolkien are inherently evil. Orcs in Elder Scrolls are not. Orcs in D&D, I don't know enough about this. Have orcs always traditionally been an inherently evil race to play as in D&D? Because surely if you choose to play an orc, you can decide your own moral alignment. So, does that make sense? Anyway.
Normalize the enemy into something domestic, dull, unserious, and unscary. If they win, is it really so terrible? What is ultimately at stake? Why is Sauron even the villain, other than the fact that they tell us he is? Why should we think that Middle-earth being ruled by family orcs would be a terrible outcome? And suddenly we have undone the very magic itself that brings Lord of the Rings to life. No longer is it a cataclysmic war between good and evil for the fate of the world in which good must triumph. The entire mythological theme underpinning the universe is dissolved because we have established that good and evil are just two shades of the same colour.
I'll let him finish.
Enchantment anyone might have felt of being a part of the Fellowship on their way to defeat an ancient and all-powerful evil evaporates into the air, and we are left with no compelling moral arc to events whatsoever.
So, yeah, I guess you could make the argument that the works of Tolkien are not the place to inject moral greyness in such a way. Then it's not the kind of place where you want to start subverting expectations, subverting fantasies, tropes, deconstructing elements of the genre, because it misses the point. If you are going to adapt something, you should perhaps work within the framework and the internal logic of that thing. And if you want to be subversive and deconstructive, create your own work and do it there. I think that's one of the reasons people get so annoyed with Rings of Power. Again, haven't seen it, but one of the reasons it seems like they're getting annoyed is this is Tolkien's work. Don't disrespect it. Don't besmirch it by doing your own thing with it instead of just going along with what Tolkien tried to do. Be a spiritual successor. Don't twist it into your own thing. If you want to do your own thing, make your own thing. I guess this kind of ties into George R. R. Martin's blog post about adaptation, which many people saw as a veiled criticism of elements of season 2 of House of the Dragon, right? Where he was saying that writers with big egos want to put their own stuff in adaptations because they don't just want to be the guy who adapted a really great piece of work. They want to be the guy who did their own great stuff and get their own recognition and accolades and so on, and be like, that was my thing. This is the thing I added. And not everyone wants that. Some people say, and I agree, if you're doing an adaptation, some changes are necessary, some changes are for the better, but massive changes that go against the themes and the ideas of the source material are in a way disrespectful for the author and just disrespectful towards the fans, because they want a solid adaptation. They want an authentic adaptation. And yeah, I agree with him what he was saying about the magic of Lord of the Ring. You're kind of losing it when you start throwing in stuff like sympathetic orc families. You're robbing Lord of the Rings of its legendary, mythological, grand good versus evil inspirational story, and you're grounding it and turning into something which it isn't. I'm beginning to repeat myself a bit, so I think I'll move on. Okay, so I think this is when he goes on to talk about George R. R. Martin. So again, I've said before, I'll say it again for people who've come in, new people who've come in. I've skimmed this, haven't watched the whole thing. I know that he talked about Rings of Power. Now he's talking about Martin. I'm interested to see what he has to say. I don't know if he's a fan of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire or Martin, whether he's going to praise him, not praise him. Based on the comments, I don't think he does praise him, so we'll see what his arguments are. But let me know what your thoughts are in the chat, by the way. Like, I'm reading the chat constantly. Let me know what your opinion is, whether you agree with Sargon's video, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with him or me or whatever. For what it's worth, I've basically agreed with the first chunk of this video. I have the feeling I'm not going to agree with the second chunk, but, you know, that's fun. It'd be boring if I agreed with everything, right? And also, feel free to send in super chats if you want me to read off a super chat on the stream. This is my job. YouTubing is my job, so it's always appreciated. It helps. It helps a lot. Well, okay. Let's continue, shall we?
So well done to our daring duo for making Lord of the Rings boring. And what happens when you're committed to a morally grey fantasy? Well, turns out you can't finish it. George R. R. Martin is the example of how a fantasy story with no heroes can't come together on its own terms.
Okay. Straight off the bat, half the video I'm like, yeah, I agree with this Rings of Power criticism. I agree with all this stuff about Tolkien and so. And straight off the bat, it's a fantasy story with no heroes is hard to finish. Okay. No heroes. Everyone in the chat, post your favourite Song of Ice and Fire hero. I'll name the obvious ones. Ned Stark, Jon Snow, Brienne of Tarth, Robb Stark, Sam Tarly, and then other characters who are more grey but have a heroic nature. They have a hero hidden within them. Tyrion Lannister, he's a very mixed bag. He definitely has heroic elements to him, although by dance you could argue he's now a villain. By Dance of Dragons, he's pretty much a villain. But Daenerys, Jaime, the Hound, Sansa, even. Who are people go? What are people? Who's your favourite Song of Ice and Fire hero? Tywin Lannister. God damn it. Brienne, yeah. Victorian. Craster, the one and only. Okay, half of these are shitposts. Chet, god damn it. The best POV character. Yeah, Sansa, Jon Snow, Sam Tully, Daenerys, Jaehaerys, Jaime in many ways. Yeah. Okay. To be fair, I haven't let him finish his point. I jumped in when he said with no heroes, probably hyperbole. Let's go back a bit.
Can't finish it. Boring. And what happens when you're committed to a morally grey fantasy? Well, turns out you can't finish it. George R. R. Martin is the example of how a fantasy story with no heroes can't come together on its own terms, because we need to be able to pick a side in a fairy tale conflict. Stories are not objective history.
Whoa. We need to pick a side in a fairy tale conflict. Okay. If any element of A Song of Ice and Fire can be broken down into fairy tale conflict, it is the others, who I said earlier represent death, versus the forces of life, of civilization, which is humanity, although the issue is it's a bunch of scheming, Machiavellian, warring factions who are more focused on giving into the worst elements of human nature, as opposed to uniting and being virtuous and brave and courageous and good and standing up to death. Jon Snow is an exception, of course. And a few other people at the wall. But yeah, fairy tale conflict is humans versus the others. There is a fairy tale conflict. It is life versus death. Sargon seems to be implying that George doesn't know which side of this greater Tolkien-esque conflict to choose. That's very silly. Yes, he does. Yeah, he knows which side to choose. It's the side of life. The others are the bad guys. He's not lying there being like, I'm such a moral relativist. Who really is the good guy? Human beings or evil ice elves with their zombie army who want to kill everything? I don't know. Life is complex. Yeah, no, come on. That's not what he's doing. Let's go back a little bit.
Because we need to be able to pick a side in a fairy tale conflict. Stories are not objective histories. They are moral lectures and follow a predetermined path. It is not a coincidence that the hero always wins. And this is why Martin is unable to finish his own fantasy series. A brilliant post by Devon Erickson summarises the problem precisely, and I'm just going to read it verbatim.
Okay, I haven't seen this. Let's see what this is.
The Song of Ice and Fire isn't actually supposed to be a dark Machiavellian hopeless subversion of Tolkien at all. It's just...
Boom. That is true. That is true. It is not the common misconception, specifically by people who haven't read the books. To be fair, if you've watched the show and you come away with the idea that it's dark, that it's Machiavellian, hopeless, nihilistic, that is understandable. The show did lean into grimdark elements more so than the books, but A Song of Ice and Fire is not grimdark, right? Grimdark is Warhammer 40k. Warhammer 40k is completely nihilistic, depressing, everything is shit, humanity is doing a bunch of evil stuff to itself in order to defeat the even more evil factions that surround it, and everything is doomed to be destroyed anyway, and it's all shit. But obviously that's not because the people who made 40k are nihilists, it's because they wanted a dark, absurdist, maximalist setting for a dark sci-fi fantasy miniature tabletop wargaming thing, right? But A Song of Ice and Fire, by Rapper in the chat said A Song of Ice and Fire is grim hope. That's an interesting way of putting it. It is dark. It's dark, it's depressing, but it's hopeful. And it is romantic with a capital R, but I might talk about that a bit later. But yes, this tweet says, Song of Ice and Fire isn't supposed to be dark, Machiavellian hope. It is meant to be dark. Machiavellian, there are characters that are Machiavellian, yes. Hopeless, there are parts where characters feel hopeless, but also where they feel hope, right? And there is dark, but there's also light. There are Machiavellian characters, but then there are also noble and true characters. They're just usually undercut by the Machiavellian characters. Or a subversion of Tolkien at all. That's correct. It's not a subversion of Tolkien. It's never meant to be a subversion of Tolkien. George R. R. Martin loves Tolkien and very specifically said that he is subverting and deconstructing post-Tolkien, quote-unquote, pale imitators. People who took Tolkien and did their own boring Dark Lord, good versus bad, lame, sort of spiritual successors that clogged up the genre. And then George R. R. Martin was like, okay, well, I don't like those, so I'm kind of going to deconstruct those tropes, but I'm not deconstructing Lord of the Rings itself, because that is what it is, and he likes it. Thank you for the super chat, Cole Shot. I will be going through super chats once I've gone through this video, so yeah.
Supposed to start that way. The details may be complex, but the formula is simple. Low fantasy version of the British Isles, torn apart by a multi-sided Machiavellian power struggle, loosely based on the War of the Roses. Things are bad because of the Machiavellian power struggle. In the back...
Yep, all of that is true.
Background, subtle hints of external magical otherworldly threat. Warring factions scoff and ignore it at first. Enter the high fantasy tropes. Prophesied hero emerges to unite the morally grey factions into an unambiguously good pro-civilization force to confront and defeat the unambiguously evil threat to all life.
Yep, it's it's not nihilistic at all, it's not grimdark, it's romantic with a capital R. There is hope, there is love. There's also loss and longing, and, you know, it's cynical. It's cynical, it's sad, it's dark, but it is hopeful. Like, goodness exists, hope exists, and it is very obviously, these things are undercut by villains in the narrative, but they're not undercut by the narrative itself. Yeah. And of course it's not a subversion of Tolkien, it's building upon... We can talk about... Another thing we can talk about maybe later is the idea of the bittersweet ending, but yeah.
Full transition, in the end, to epic Tolkien-esque high fantasy, played straight rather than subverted.
We don't fully know whether the ending, the living versus the dead, the humans versus the White Walkers, whether that will be completely played straight. My guess is it'll be a bit more complex than just high fantasy Tolkien-esque battle. I think it'll be more nuanced than it was in the show, but I don't think I quite buy into the idea that it's going to be a complete rug pull. You know, the others are actually the good guys, and we're going to negotiate with them to end the war. I don't think it's going to be something like that.
Hero triumphant, humanity triumphant, realm unified in peace and prosperity, roll credits.
Okay, I agree with basically all of this tweet. Again, maybe the idea of the ending, the climax being played straight rather than subverted, we don't know, and there might be some... We'll see, but yeah. Yeah, I think this tweet's... Craig, do people agree in the chat? Do people agree with me there? I think it's a good tweet.
Were the story to be completed thus, completed as it wants to be completed, as it yearns to be completed, every dark, gritty Machiavellian moment would be fully justified. Every chapter and scene filled with thugs and villains and no heroes at all would be fully justified, because they would merely serve to emphasise the rarity of heroes and the need for them.
Yes, that is the purpose. That is the purpose. It is hopeful in spite of the darkness. It is hopeful in spite of the misery. People are good, and there aren't many people who are good, but it is rare, but they are good despite being undercut by snakes and Machiavellian schemers and people who indulge in their worst excesses.
Because they would make the arrival of a true hero that much more satisfying when, late but not too late, he arrived.
Yep.
A Song of Ice and Fire doesn't really want to be a subversion of Tolkien at all. It wants to be a path out of darkness and into light.
I mean, it's like I said, it was never meant to be a subversion of Tolkien. It's subverting shitty, boring Tolkien imitators that were clogging up the genre, and not doing their own thing with the genre. That's what it was.
It wants to be a study in how Tolkien is deeply relevant, even to a gritty, morally grey world. This is what George knows it needs to be, but George cannot write it. Why? Because he's a socialist and a boomer.
What? Hold on a sec. I feel like speaking of having the rug pulled out from under the reader, I feel like I've just had the rug pulled out under me. I feel like I'm floating in limbo here. Sorry, what was that ending?
George knows it needs to be, but George cannot write it. Why? Because he's a socialist and a boomer.
Because he's a socialist and a boomer. Okay, let's hear the justification before we respond to it. George R. R. Martin can't finish the books because he's a socialist boomer. Everything that came before this is a really good analysis of the books and where they're going, but he can't finish it, he can't reach that conclusion because he's a socialist boomer. Let's work out what this tweeter's argument is.
Socialism's motivational core.
Who's the tweeter, by the way? I just want to refer to him because this isn't Sargon. For people listening, this isn't Sargon giving his opinion. He's reading out a tweet. Well, he agrees with it, but Devon, that's it, Devon. Okay.
Envy, and his one underlying it. Why? Because he's a socialist and a boomer. Socialism.
Hope you like all the keyboard clacking ASMR, by the way.
Socialism's motivational core is envy, and his one underlying rule is thou shalt not be better than me.
Okay, this isn't a political channel, so I'm not going to be delving into politics, including my politics or whatever, and I don't care the politics of anyone in my audience, in my fan base, in my chat. I don't care. I love you. I don't care. But that's a very parodic interpretation, I think, of socialism. Its motivational core is envy. But no, you know what? Even if that's true or not, it's not relevant. Whether the motivational core of socialism is being envious and bitter, people call it an ideology of spite and all that stuff. That's not relevant because George R. R. Martin isn't a socialist, so it doesn't belong in this tweet, right? It doesn't matter what you think socialism is. George R. R. Martin isn't a socialist. I haven't seen anything to suggest he is. Looking at all his, back in the day, he was a conscientious objector and a bit of a hippie, but if you look at the comments he makes about politics, he sounds like the most generic centre-left milquetoast liberal you've ever seen. He literally did a blog post last year railing against both the radical right and the woke left. George R. R. Martin did that. He's like a kind of a centre-left American Democrat liberal. That's the vibe I get from him. I don't think he's a socialist at all. Where's the evidence for this? Where does this come from?
The boomer's single guiding principle is whatever makes me feel pleasure right now is good, and whatever makes me feel bad is evil.
I mean, that's funny, but also a strange, gross generalization of what people of a certain generation collectively believe in. Calling him a boomer, he's taking a while because he's a boomer. Okay, yeah, that's funny, but outside of discussing how being older makes you more tired physically and mentally, and that could affect writing, being he's in his 70s, which means that everything that makes him feel pleasure now is good, and what makes him feel bad is evil, and therefore his sense of morality is different. It's what? Am I missing something?
Take these together, and you get someone who has a real problem with heroes. Heroes are, by definition, the best of us, at least on some dimension, and if your underlying motivation is envy, standing next to one is going to make you feel bad.
Okay.
This means that socialists, boomers, and socialist boomers tend not to want to believe in heroes and heroism.
Okay, well, again, that feels like a gross generalization. I'm not gonna go deep into the ideology of it, but what has this got to do with George R. R. Martin is what's more interesting to me. What's it got to do with George R. R. Martin and how he approaches fiction?
They want to convince themselves that anything which appears good is secretly evil, actually,
Someone in the chat, socialism is when no writing.
and that anyone who makes them feel or look bad is obviously evil. So when they see a hero, they tend to call him a fascist, because they want to feel morally superior to him.
Okay. Who's they? What, all boomers collectively? All socialists collectively? Like, I know it's Twitter, so it's all about being hyperbolic and not allowing for nuance, but what do you mean? Okay, benefit of the doubt. I know there are certain people who point to certain heroes and then use the F word, the demonetizable F word, to... Like, especially when it comes to superheroes. You see that when people are like, Batman's a fascist. And it's people who don't have a fucking clue what fascism actually means. They're like, Superman's a fascist because big and strong and sharp jawline and fights criminals, but whatever. The term fascism is just thrown around meaninglessly all the time to everyone. You know, everyone uses it. People on the right, centre, left, everyone mislabels people as fascists and throw that term around because they don't know what it means. So yeah, I don't know. Let's see where this goes. Let's see where this builds to. Let's see where this tweet builds to. Oh wait, Archive in the chat says, remember when you called Aemond fascist because he was standing on a castle battlement in a leather outfit? Hear me out, bro. Hear me out. I was saying he looks fascist. I said he looked fascist. Or he was wearing an outfit that was looked quite anachronistic, compared to for the medieval setting compared to all the other characters. Aemond, there's a episode where Aemond's wearing like what looked like a leather military outfit, and he was like standing dramatically on the balcony, and he was kind of giving off a sort of early 20th century dictator look.
The only way that they can admit that someone has a moral compass at all is if they can feel superior to him in some way, usually by portraying them as naive and hence doomed to failure because he is not empowered by cynicism and selfishness to pursue the most efficient path to whatever.
Okay, sure. Yeah, if you have a story where you portray the heroes as naive or stupid, as if to suggest this world and the real world dark and bitter and cynical, and being good, being righteous, being virtuous is meaningless and pointless. It means that you're dumb, that you're not smart enough to be morally grey or whatever. Doomed to failure, and doomed to failure, or I'm smart and I'm a good person, but I'm guaranteed to lose just because that's the nature of morality and that's the nature of life. If the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire were portrayed that way, then I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty nihilistic. That's pretty nihilistic. That's pretty grimdark. Yeah, but that's not how they're portrayed. That is not how they're portrayed. I'm just checking the chat for a sec. Yeah, okay.
So if old George thinks that everyone who appears good is either secretly evil or openly stupid, then writing a character with heroic impulses is going to be tough, and writing about how they succeed, impossible.
Yes, it would be. If George thinks that everyone who appears good is either secretly evil or openly stupid, but he writes good characters that are not secretly evil or openly stupid, and there's nothing to suggest George R. R. Martin, the man, thinks that people who appear good in real life are secretly bad or dumb, and to think that's his personal opinion is strange, and this almost feels like a tweet from someone who hasn't read A Song of Ice and Fire, because I don't know how you can come to this conclusion about this book series if you've read the books.
This is why George can write characters with noble motives, Jon Snow, Eddard Stark, etc., but he keeps making them fail. You see, in George's...
Okay, keeps making them fail? Does he keep making them fail? Okay. Let's continue. He doesn't, by the way, he doesn't keep making them fail. Eddard Stark's death is quite specific, I do have to admit. It's quite specific in what it does to the story. But yeah, let the tweet continue.
World. Heroism.
Oh, yeah, right. What I was going to say, but Jon Snow has lots of successes. Brienne has successes. Lots of good, honourable, noble characters do not fail. They succeed. Let's continue.
Must be a sham or a weakness, because then George's own bad character is wisdom and enlightenment, instead of just a lack of moral virtue.
Okay, so now the tweet has fully just leapt into personally insulting George R. R. Martin as having a bad character. This person presumably has never met George, doesn't know him personally, but is just saying he is a bad person because they have read his mind and discovered that he thinks heroism is a sham or a weakness. I don't know how else they would know George has this view of heroism, because it certainly doesn't come from the books, where heroism is not presented as a sham or weakness, and he's never said it in any interviews. In fact, he said the opposite, so they must be reading his mind with a special mind-reading device.
If heroes are all frauds or suckers, then George is being smart, because he has seen through the whole heroism thing.
Has he seen through the whole heroism thing? Because that doesn't seem to have anything to do with what's in the books.
If heroes are real, and they sometimes do succeed, and they do make the world better for everyone, then George is just a fat, lazy, cynical old man who doesn't want to finish
Okay, unnecessarily insulting him personally. Great.
his art for the sake of integrity, because he only ever wanted money, and now he has more of that than he knows what to do with. In order to finish his story, George would need to have an awakening of virtue.
It's quite impressive, actually, how this tweet went from being genuinely, like, sensible and interesting to, like, borderline insane. Okay, let me gather my thoughts here. So this, like I said, this tweet basically started off well, but then ended with assigning an ideology to George R. R. Martin that he doesn't believe in, socialism, then assigning a kind of absurd parodic interpretation of socialism, as well as what all old people collectively believe in, apparently, and then saying that this is specifically the reason why George R. R. Martin can't finish, because he is inherently a bad person who doesn't like heroes and doesn't believe heroes actually exist, and if they do exist, they're dumb or they're bad people pretending to be heroes, even though that's got nothing to do with what's in A Song of Ice and Fire. And that's why he can't finish, apparently. He cannot finish because he has no integrity, or is it fat, lazy, cynical old man who doesn't want to finish for the sake of art? The truth, of course, Occam's razor, what's the most simplest explanation? He is old, and therefore less energetic, more tired, maybe slower mentally, maybe slower physically. He doesn't have the financial incentive, and yes, that will massively affect working on a difficult series like A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, if you write Storm of Swords in 2 years, but then take 12 years to write Winds of Winter when you're rich, that's going to affect your output for sure. He's a human being. He's also depressed. He's depressed that he keeps doing blog posts talking about how all his friends are dying and how he's getting older, and he gets distracted with other projects and he worries about his legacy and he stresses all the time. All that stuff is going to affect him, but, you know, could just be as simple as writing block, or it's probably all of that. But either way, it could be undiagnosed ADHD, as I've heard some people say. But all of that is irrelevant because we don't know, and we cannot read his mind, and we can guess, but outright stating obnoxiously stating that, oh yes, he can't finish it because he's a bad person, and he doesn't like heroes, and he can't wrap up a story that involves heroes succeeding against evil because that goes against his worldview, is a complete and utter mischaracterization of what his worldview is, which is romantic and hopeful. Right? And this was the Company of the Cat video, Romanticism versus Nihilism in A Song of Ice and Fire, or whatever the title is. Go check it out, Company of the Cat. She brought up the fact that in an interview, George R. R. Martin said that one of his most favourite lines from Tolkien is, and I'm paraphrasing here, despair is the ultimate crime. That despair, and this is in reference to Denethor, despair is the ultimate crime. That what matters the most in times of darkness, when winter is coming, is hope. Is hope and a flicker of light, and that's what's in the books. Hope and a flicker of light. So yeah. So Occam's razor, simplest explanation. He's older, he's depressed because of his friends dying, he doesn't have the financial incentive, he's got writer's block, maybe he's got trauma from the show ending badly, etc., etc. That's more likely, I think, than creating an alien mind-reading device and saying that he's envious of heroes, therefore he can't write a heroic ending. That's insane. Again, parts of this tweet are baffling. What makes this person think that George R. R. Martin thinks that good people are secretly bad or dumb? Is Jon Snow secretly bad or dumb? One of the most important characters? One of the biggest heroes in the Song of Ice and Fire? Is he dumb? Is he stupid? No. No. Is he secretly evil? No. Does he fail? Does he have to fail? Because good people must fail in the world. No, he doesn't have to fail. Right? He successfully protects the wall from the Wildling army. He successfully rallies the Wildlings together to join forces with the Night's Watch and fight against the Wildlings. He is successful. What about Brienne? Is Brienne secretly evil or dumb? No, she's not dumb. She's a tad naive. But she's a smart woman. She's brave, she's courageous, she's noble. Is she secretly evil? No. Does she fail? Well, think of A Feast for Crows, where she's outside the inn at the crossroads. It's dark and it's raining. There's a bunch of orphan children whose lives are threatened by Rorge and Biter, a couple of hulking sadists and rapists and murderers, armed with swords, in heavy armour. And Brienne knows that she could just turn around and leave these children to their fate, whatever that may be, but instead she stands up for them, knowing that there's a very high likelihood that she as a woman will die against these two hulking men, and despite that she defeats them. With help, she gets help from Gendry, and she's gravely wounded in the process. She gets half her face bitten off by Biter, but she still succeeds, right? What is that fight if not showing a courageous, noble character standing up for the innocent, doing what's right and succeeding? With great cost to herself, but still succeeding. And I could go on. I could go on about other heroes succeeding. So Ned Stark's failure. Ned Stark's death is often brought up as proof that A Song of Ice and Fire is inherently cynical and nihilistic. The good guy, the classic protagonist, he dies. The books are saying, guess what? Good guys die in this world. No, that's not true. So in a meta sense, his death, it warns readers that no character is safe, and it helps to increase the stakes and all that stuff. But in the story, it shows the folly of a simple, honourable man entering a nest of vipers, unprepared, and not playing their game. He's merciful, he's honourable, and he's killed because of that. Okay, so if Ned Stark was the only good, honourable character, and that was his fate, you could make the argument, yeah, maybe the Song of Ice and Fire is nihilistic. But that's not the case. He's not the only character who's like that. Yeah, the characters fail. When they do fail, it's for two reasons. When good characters fail, because they do, right? Jon Snow is stabbed. Brienne does get wounded. Sam Tarly doesn't succeed at everything he wants to do. Tyrion does give in to darkness. Sansa does escape. Instead of from the frying pan into the fire, Sansa escapes the fire into the frying pan. It's not as bad, but it's still bad. So good characters fail for two reasons, right? So one, it's because they are undercut by bad people who the narrative portrays as being bad and who deserve to be punished for it. Like they are bad. That is a bad thing. They are undercutting the good people. It is even riskier for people to be good in this universe, and that's why it's so important when heroes do arise, like Jon Snow, and they are worthy of being celebrated. But also, this story is about actions and consequences. It's not about the good guys win and the good guys lose and the bad guys win. Haha, heroes suck. Everything is morally grey. There is no meaning to anything. No, that's not A Song of Ice and Fire. And you would know that if you read the books, which makes me think the person who wrote this tweet, literally hasn't read the books. Because no one who's read the books would have this interpretation. Right? A Song of Ice and Fire isn't bitter and nihilistic. Okay, let's point to evil characters who have failed in A Song of Ice and Fire. Let me know in the chat. Joffrey, he's a tyrant. He gets... what are the consequences? He's poisoned. Okay, what about the phrase? They break custom, they massacre unarmed allies at a wedding, they get rewarded by the Lancers, but as a result, they're falling apart. The small folk hate them, other houses hate them, outlaws are capturing them and hanging them. It's obvious that they're going to collapse and perhaps descend into civil war. They are fucked. What about Tywin Lannister? He helps initiate the Red Wedding, he's terrible to his son, etc., etc. He ends up being killed by the son he abused and tormented. Yeah, he had it coming. What about the Boltons? They betrayed Robb Stark, they took over Winterfell, they took over the Lord Paramountcy of the North and the title Warden of the North. Well, Roose Bolton and Ramsay Bolton, he has been legitimised. They are currently snowed in Winterfell. They're surrounded by allies that they can't trust. Well, allies, quote unquote. And they have Stannis Baratheon marching on them with an angry northern horde. They are fucked. The story is not good guys failing and bad guys winning, it's actions have consequences. If you make a mistake in this ruthless world, whether it's out of mercy and honour, or out of greed and ruthlessness, you will eventually pay the price. Right? Cersei's Walk of Atonement as well, yes. She is villainous, she empowers the High Septon and murders the previous High Septon and commits all kind of horrible crimes. She ends up getting arrested and punished and forced to walk naked through the streets. Actions have consequences. And like I said, that scene of Brienne is the perfect... The scene of Brienne is the perfect example of a hero standing up for what's right and succeeding. Yeah. And then again, other parts of this tweet, talking about George R. R. Martin and basically acting like you're reading his mind, saying that he is of bad character, he has no moral virtue, he is this and that. It lessens the argument. Like, don't act like you know him, you don't know him personally. It weakens... It really does weaken your analysis when you just start personally insulting the person you haven't met and extrapolating what's in his head, which everyone does, by the way. Right, left, centre, politics, whatever. People tend to, and I think it's a form of cognitive dissonance, they will assign the worst possible interpretation to people they disagree with and dislike because it makes disagreeing with them easier. Hence, everyone I disagree with is a communist or a socialist or a fascist, or a racist, or a homophobe, or a bigot, or whatever, because it's easy to do that. Humans are complex, and it's easy to simplify them. George is a super complex human being. It's easy to simplify things into he is fat and lazy and has no virtue, and therefore can't write a story that ends with virtuous heroes being brave and winning because he hates heroes, even though that's got nothing to do with anything in the books. So yeah, mind reading. Yeah, the whole he only ever wanted money. You don't know that either. Right, this concept that it's just where is it? Yeah, he can't finish his art for the sake of art or integrity because he only ever wanted money. You don't know that. You don't know anything about why he wrote this story. Maybe money was part of it. Is that the only reason? Yeah. Again, the first part of the tweet is really good. The last part just full of mind reading and misinterpreting the books to the point of lying about the books. But I don't think this, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I don't think he's lying. I think the tweeter just hasn't read the books and is maybe even going off the show and assuming the books are like the show. I don't know. I'm very baffled by this. Oh, and by the way, just to throw this in there, the idea of, like, it's as simple as he doesn't have the integrity to finish. Like, humans are complicated, right? I personally struggle to fulfill promises when there is no reward or no punishment that's in place, because I have ADHD, I have a literal dopamine deficiency, executive dysfunction. Maybe George has the same, right? Like, humans are complicated. It's not as simple as if he had more integrity, he would finish right now. It's okay to be absolutely disappointed and annoyed with George for not finishing, but there's got to be a myriad of reasons why he hasn't finished. This is the most baffling reason, I think. This is the worst reason I've seen for why he hasn't finished. There are lots of things to say about how he's struggling to put his ending together based on, thematic stuff and what his story represents and so on. But so anyway, I'm spending too long on this tweet. Let's continue. The video's got a few minutes left.
First have to develop a sense of integrity, a desire to fulfill his promises, even when no one can or will punish him for not doing so.
Oh wait, we've done this bit. Oh wait, no, we haven't finished this tweet. I thought the tweet was over. Hold on, no, it's not over. There's
Finish his
more.
story, George would need to have an awakening
God
of
damn it.
virtue. He would first have to develop a sense of integrity, a desire to fulfill his promises, even when no one can or will punish him for not doing so. He would then have to develop a sense of humility, because to write a better person than he is, he would have to admit to himself that there was such a thing, that people can be better, and that trying to be better is an actual worthy goal, not just the act of falling for a con game run to control you.
Okay, so again, we are guessing that he is not humble, although by all accounts he is extremely humble for people who've met him, but I guess he's not actually humble, and he doesn't like writing people who are better than him, which every author does, by the way. Every author who writes a hero is writing people better than them, who they strive to be, who they want other people to be, who we all aspire to be. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
The longer someone goes without admitting their faults, the harder those faults are to admit to, because they've been more deeply invested in. And this means he would have to also develop the courage to admit to himself that he is in fact a fat, lazy, cynical old coward.
Again, just character assassination. Treating him like a caricature instead of a complex man. To get, I don't know why. Cynically, you could say to get retweets, whatever. It could just be, I don't know. I don't assign super cynical stuff to this tweet. I think it's benefit of the doubt. This tweeter does not understand the books they've read.
That Tolkien, whom he envies and despises, was the far better man all along.
Tolkien, who he envies and despises. This is the worst part of the tweet so far. Tolkien, who he loves Tolkien. He can't stop talking about how much he loves Tolkien. He says he reads Lord of the Rings every 2 years. He thinks Tolkien's the best fantasy writer ever. He says he loved reading Lord of the Rings when he was younger. Didn't he recently visit Tolkien's grave when he visited? Where exactly is Tolkien's grave? Yeah, I know George R. R. Martin visited the island and England recently, but he recently visited his grave. He loves the man, and he's inspired by the man, and he's not subverting his tropes. He's subverting the tropes of pale imitators who he doesn't like. He envies and despises. Why would he possibly envy or despise Tolkien? Why are we turning this man into like a horrible fat little gremlin? I hate Tolkien. He's so much better than me. I can't handle it. I'm gonna do something subversive that puts a middle finger up to Tolkien. Fuck that guy. Like, what?
George R. R. Martin can have no heroes.
Okay,
because they
now for those listening and not watching, the tweet is over. Now this is Sargon giving his opinion. And he said before he agreed with this tweet, but this is him giving his opinion. I'll go back a little bit.
despises was the far better man all along.
Okay, tweet is finished.
George R. R. Martin can have no heroes, because they would suggest that one side is unambiguously right,
There are heroes. We've gone through them. There are a load of heroes, and they're awesome.
and the other side is unambiguously wrong.
I mean, within the context of life versus death, the others are clearly being portrayed as evil, and the living are good, although within the living you have moral greyness, you have factions fighting each other for petty reasons, you have individuals, some of who are great, some of whom are mixed bag, some of whom are outright evil, right? People who talk about Sun vs. Fire, everyone is grey. There are some, like, outright purely evil people. Ramsay is purely evil. The Mountain is purely evil. Because Joffrey's a different story, I guess, because he's like a child, so there's kind of, he's in his own box. He's only like 12 in the books, 12, 13. But there are purely evil people, because purely evil people exist in real life. That's just a fact. Purely evil people do exist in real life. Doesn't mean they're not complex people, complicated people, but there are people who exist who are like, everything they do and think is evil. That's just, some people are broken.
Martin is not the American Tolkien. He is, in fact, the American anti-Tolkien.
I've never liked the whole Martin is the American Tolkien. I've never liked that. You know, and soon the next big fantasy author is going to be the new Martin. Like I released my saga. Hey, Lord Haven is the new Martin, the new George R. R. Martin. Like, let him be his own man. He's not the new Tolkien because he's not doing the same thing Tolkien did. In terms of influence in pop culture, he's got closer than most fantasy authors to Tolkien, but he's not the American Tolkien. I'm not a fan of that.
And he is learning where the fruits of such a course end up. And to defend his own failure, all of Martin's critiques of Tolkien are founded in anti-metaphor.
Okay.
The act of attempting to deconstruct and reduce to the mere details the great narrative of a story. As he famously asked, Tolkien tells us the kingdom is well run, but what's Aragorn's tax policy?
The first paragraph of this little thing, literally, he's saying, "I yield to no one in my admiration of Lord of the Rings. I reread it every few years. It's one of the great books." He's talking about how much he grates it. He loves it. In the same video where he's being accused of being hateful and envious towards Tolkien.
The obvious answer is, well, whatever was necessary for the kingdom to be well run. Because if you're asking questions like this, then you're missing the point.
Okay, Sargon is right here. The whole Aragon tax policy is silly. You are missing the point. Like, why would you actually be interested in what Aragon did after he won? But this is just George being autistic, let's be honest. This is him saying that he's always been more interested in the minutiae of stories. You know, this is a story that's meant to be grand and mythical, but he kind of wants to know about the aftermath and the details of what happens to the orcs and the details of the tax policy and all that stuff. He's saying this is what he wants to write about. And of course, Song of Ice and Fire is more grounded and does focus on more of the political specifics of the fantasy medieval kingdom. And so he did his own thing, you know, which is fine. I do agree that he is missing the point by saying this, but also I think he knows he is. I think this is kind of like a tongue-in-cheek comment about what he prefers writing about and reading.
The story is not about these mundane technical details. The story is about the fate of the moral arc of the universe itself. Regardless of the personal failings of his characters, Martin would then, as the author, be forced to pick and endorse the moral views of one side over another.
The moral views of people who want to live versus evil ice demons who want to kill it. Well, yeah, no, I think he's picked a side on that one, yeah. I think we can say... The book's not coming out, but I think we can safely say that.
Which is something that he personally is unable to do, and therefore he personally is unable to finish his novels.
You don't know that! You don't know that! Unable to do... He's unable to finish his novels for so many reasons that I went through. Boiling it down to that is so silly.
Because as he is committed to a world in which there are no heroes, but many villains, he must therefore conclude that in the Game of Thrones...
What? He hasn't committed to a world where there's no heroes and only villains? No, he hasn't. There are loads of heroes, and there are loads of people who are kind of in between being a hero and a villain. Various shades of grey. What? Sorry, are we pretending this is 40k now? That every faction is evil and every person in it is evil? Like, huh? Baffling.
A villain must win. And who wants to write that?
No, a villain... The trend of A Song of Ice and Fire is not that a villain must win. So you used to have people... who are like, oh man, I want Littlefinger to sit the Iron Throne at the end. That'd be so cool. Or like... oh man, if the Night King wins at the end, that would be so Game of Thrones. Those people were misunderstanding what Game of Thrones was. Right, the whole Ramsay quote, if this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. That's not what Game of Thrones is. That's not what A Song of Ice and Fire is. You can't read the books and come to the conclusion, yeah, it looks like the bad guys are going to win this one. No. Although, see... I went into this assuming Sargon had read the books, because he's like, if he's going to talk about the books and George R. R. Martin, you'd assume he's read the books. But it sounds like he hasn't, because the person who made that tweet and then Sargon, I don't think either of them have read the books, because I don't understand why you would so severely misinterpret a series of, brutal and subversive, but ultimately romantic and hopeful books as being grimdark or whatever, and the villains have to win. I don't know.
And so it's not a surprise that he'll make up any old excuse not to finish his own work. As he recently claimed in one blog post, it's the rise of fascism around the world that's haunting him and preventing him from finishing his story. So I think it's kind of annoying that people, of all his multiple recent blog posts, people are taking one specific thing George R. R. Martin is saying and ignoring the wide context of, oh, he's saying that he can't write because of the rise of fascism. Isn't he a silly liberal? But it's like, this is in the context of him saying that he is depressed because all of his friends are dying and that he's getting older and that he's worrying about his legacy and etc., etc. And then on top of that, yeah, he has political fears. Whether those are unfounded or what, that's irrelevant. Like, it's in the wider context of everything seems like shit. And if you know anyone with depression, he seems like he's got depression. If you know anyone with depression, they project that onto every aspect of their life, of their friendships, of the world at large, politics. Everything becomes, we are doomed, everything sucks.
it's a completely warped perspective of what the world is. It just seems lame to be like, oh, he's saying he can't write because of fascism. What's next? Or like, oh, he says he can't write because of fascism. Meanwhile, Tolkien wrote during World War II. And it's like, he's saying he's depressed, and this is one of the reasons he's depressed. But it's one line compared to several blog posts of being like, my friends are dying and I'm really sad. So like, stop being a dick. The people who like to bring this one thing up and ignore all the other things are just being a dick, honestly. Just mocking an old man who's sad that his friends are dying. It's like, come on. I guess it's easy. It's not easy to mock a man who's saying he's struggling to write the books because he's sad because his friends are dying. But it is easy to mock a man who complains about fascism because he's like a libtard or something. I don't know.
Which really does sound like an excuse, doesn't it? Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this.
I have enjoyed this, Mr. Sargon. I have enjoyed it. I think it's really fun, actually. I really enjoyed listening to his takes on Tolkien and the Rings of Power, which I agreed with. And then him reading out that tweet and giving some of his own opinions about Martin, which started off fine and then just descended into, like, mind-reading, personal insults, and misinterpretation. As usual, I know I'm very rambly. I'm not the most eloquent person. I do repeat myself a lot, etc., etc. We know. You're not new to this. The people watching this live stream, you're not new to. But yeah, I did enjoy this. This was fun. I kind of like the idea of getting interpretations that I disagree with and breaking it down and finding out why they think that way, why I disagree, etc., etc. With regards to fantasy and sort of Ice and Fire. Maybe should I do more of this stuff? I don't know.
A lot of work actually came together to make this video possible.
A lot of work came together, except I guess reading the actual books and reading the countless interviews where George R. R. Martin says how much he loves Tolkien and wants to emulate Tolkien's ending. He literally is like, Tolkien's ending is brilliant because it's bittersweet, because you have the triumph of good versus evil, but then you also have Frodo is like scarred and he has to basically leave this mortal plane to travel with the elves to heal, and also there's a scouring of the Shire, which is its own thing. One of the few things I actually remember from the Lord of the Rings books when I was a kid is the description of Wormtongue leaping on Saruman and slicing his throat during the scouring of the Shire. That really sticks with me. Where was I? I got distracted by myself. What was I saying? Yes, yeah, bittersweet. George R. R. Martin, he's like, yeah, I want that ending too, which I imagine will be good triumphs over evil, and he's blatantly said this. Good triumphs versus evil, but it comes at a cost. In this brutal world, being courageous, being good, comes at a cost, but it's a cost that's worth it. But it's not easy, because if it were easy, everyone would be good, right? Just felt the need to repeat that sentence 3 times for some reason. My brain is frazzled. I always get frazzled brain during live streams. I'm either like super eloquent or my words are just a blah, blah, blah.
So if you would be interested in something along these lines, issue 2 of Islander magazine is now available, featuring articles, of course, by myself and many other luminaries of
Ooh, fancy.
modern right-wing thought. This is the cutting edge of where we are politically, philosophically, and aesthetically. The magazine will only be on sale for about 2-3 weeks from when this video
I'll let this play out.
goes up, and will not be reprinted again. So do follow the link in the description and get your copy while it is available, because like all good mythic things, this is a story that's only going to be told once.
Okay, so yeah, I guess it's only fair if anyone's interested in Islander magazine, check it out. He said a bunch of sort of right-wing people writing provocative articles. Oh, sorry, thought-provoking articles. Probably also provocative in some sense, but thought-provoking articles. Feel free to check that out. Yeah. So I think, cool. I think it's time to check out some super chats, don't you? Let's see the super chats. What did people ask me? I think this was really cool. I really liked doing this. Like I said, it's all about being calm and respectful. Like, I don't care what people's politics are, you know. People are complex. People are human. Let's not boil people down in the same way that tweeter and even Sargon boiled down George R. R. Martin. So, thank you for the super chat from Coleshot, who says, do you consider Sandor Clegane a hero? Not in the traditional sense, not in the sense of sorry, I got distracted by a different super chat. Sorry, yeah, not in the sense of like Jon Snow. He's not Jon Snow. He's not Ned Stark, etc., etc. He's got elements of heroism in terms of helping to defend and look after Sansa Stark. Although how much of that is motivated by him having a creepy fixation on her? Yeah, maybe that's not so wholesome. I think. I mean, the Hound. I think this is a comment I saw actually in that Company of the Cat video about romanticism versus nihilism, which is like Game of Thrones is like the Hound tried to adapt to Song of Ice and Fire, where he is the cynic, he is the nihilist, but despite that, he does try to save Sansa, and he does look after Arya, and he clearly has good within him, even though he is so bitter and cynical, and he is brutal, and he is a murderer, and he is a creep. So no, he's not a hero. He might even be... even anti-hero might be going too easy on him. He is quite a bad guy. It's just that because his brother's the Mountain, people have a nicer view of the Hound, I think. But yeah. Anyway, thank you for the super chat from Bilbo Boggins, who says, "But Haven, don't forget Aragorn's tax policies." Yeah, I went on to talk about that. The whole... I always found the tax policy thing silly, but I do think it's George just saying, this is the kind of fantasy I'd like to write. I want something a bit more grounded. I want to focus more on the politics of it, and he obviously understands the point of Tolkien. I'm not going to read that super chat out by Kyle. Thank you for the super chat, Kyle, but it's got a word in it that obviously I'm not going to say. But he was saying, yeah. Thank you for the super chat from Boomler, who says, just wanted to know your opinion on Oswald Mosley, since I know you're a great fan. Thank you, Boomler. I couldn't do these live streams without you trolling in the chat, without you and Loopsy trolling in the chat. My thoughts on Mosley, it was a clown. Joking aside, he's a clown who just completely fucked up his reputation. He could have just been normal and then decided to be weird, and now he's just known for being a clown. Okay, yeah, I know you censored the word in the super chat, but it's just, I don't, yeah. But the vague, what you were saying is that go and look up a certain thing about Sargon. He did this and that. He ran for office. Blah blah blah. Yeah, you can do. People can do that if they want. I'm not really interested in talking about that stuff. Cool. Is there anything else to talk about? Does anyone agree with Sargon's take, by the way? Before I leave, before I end the stream and have some dinner, does anyone agree with his take about George R. R. Martin and that any idea that the books can't be finished because he doesn't have a view of heroism that's compatible with the ending of of like a kind of mythological Tolkien good versus evil climax that he's aiming towards? I don't know if that sentence quite came together. Cool. So yeah, I guess to wrap up, if there's no more super chats, etc., etc., I think I'm going to tell you, for those who weren't here at the very start of the live stream, I was saying I had a bit of a break. I've come back. I'm working hard on a video called Every Single Valyrian Steel Weapon Explained. And it won't just be talking about weapons, it'll be talking about armor and items and even a razor blade. I know, right? But anyway, yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be coming out sometime this week, hopefully in just like a couple days. And then after that animated video, I want to do a live stream, maybe with Quinn the GM. We'll see. You know, he's got a difficult schedule. Might just be me, might be with Quinn. But I want to do a live stream about Valyrian Steel where we break down every Valyrian steel weapon and kind of what its fate will be, what its future will be in the books, if the books come out, but also what houses don't have Valyrian steel weapons, and maybe the chat, you can all work together to give me ideas for like, what, for example, what should the Arryn Valyrian steel weapon be? What should it be called? What should the colour scheme be? What should the pommel look like? All of that stuff. So that'll be a fun one. And then I think Quinn and I still need to do like a House of the Dragon Season 3 prediction live stream. Like, we're slightly late, but also we can take into account George R. R. Martin's blog post about not being hyped for Season 3. That could be fun. Yeah, and then after Valyrian Steel Weapons, I'm going to do the video about the dumb fucking A Song of Ice and Fire cookbook. And then I'm going to be working hard on Every Fray Explained and putting more effort into regular live streams to sustain the channel while I work on Every Fray, because Every Fray is probably going to be like, that could take a long time for me because it's a big script. It's a big script. Also, this reminds me, should I watch Rings of Power? Should I actually watch it? At some point I've got to do Tolkien lore, right? I got to properly reread Lord of the Rings now that I'm an adult, read the Silmarillion, even read the Hobbit, and then do some animated Tolkien lore. I feel like that's too deep even for me. Animated Tolkien lore. I feel like I'd get so much wrong. The comments would be furious at me. Just doing that one June video knocked me out, and all the comments were like, "You got it wrong." But I'll tell you what, Tolkien, I'm not sure. There are other YouTubers who are so much better at doing Tolkien lore, so much better than me, including In Deep Geek, shout out. But my channel, I think definitely Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, that's on the cards. The Witcher is on the cards, both talking about the book lore, the video game lore, and also shitting on that terrible Netflix TV show. And yeah, Memory. I'm reading Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Like, I started reading it last year, I fell out of it, I'm going back into it. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and the Farseer trilogy are the two books that massively inspired, the two trilogies that massively inspired A Song of Ice and Fire. Like, massively. I was reading a chapter in Dragonbone Chair, and literally like a red comet goes overhead, and I'm like, hold the fuck, a red comet? George, you even copied the red comet? Come on. Elder Scrolls, thank you, Flippy. Elder Scrolls is like the classic thing people keep asking. Elder Scrolls lore would be lots of fun to animate and talk about. Yeah. What else? Yeah, Elder Scrolls, Witcher, Warhammer, animated Daedric Princes. Oh, the drawing for that stuff will be fun. Witcher rant. Oh boy, you better believe it. Tau lore. Hell yeah. Dragon Riders of Pern. Oh, that reminds me. Another thing about this whole like George R. R. Martin subverting Tolkien, that he was like late to the party. Like, The Witcher and A Song of Ice and Fire came out in the 90s. He was like 10, 20 years late when he was subverting fantasy tropes. In the 80s, you had Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. You had The Black Company. 10 years previously, in the 70s, you had Elric of Melniboné. Like, George wasn't even new to this. He was like a latecomer to doing dark, subversive fantasy. It's just that A Song of Ice and Fire became a massive adaptation, and then in pop culture, you see Lord of the Rings in the early 2000s, and then you see Game of Thrones starting in the early 2010s, and your brain goes, huh, classic fantasy. The one that's subverting it and is doing something different, and then you kind of irrationally are like, this is a subversion of Lord of the Rings, when like it isn't. Animated Winds of Winter, because at this point the book is a fantasy. Honestly, at some point I should just animate the fucking Preston Jacobs Winds of Winter fanfic. At some point, if I ever officially give up on Winds, I'll read the fat and I'll be like, hey Preston, do I have permission to animate your fucking chapters? Do you read any Joe Abercrombie? No, but I want to. I'm really going on a fantasy binge this year. I've been struggling with reading, and I'm officially going, nah, I'm not. I'm deciding instead of choosing. Like, I am gonna consume a bunch of fantasy. I'm doing Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I'm gonna do Black Company. I'm gonna do Empire of Ash trilogy. Even sci-fi. Gonna look at The Expanse. I want to do Farseer trilogy. I want to do Earthsea. I want to see Dragon Riders of Pern. I want to 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 21st century. I want to look at loads and loads of fantasy. I'm getting into Warhammer a lot, Warhammer 40k, looking at Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar as well, soaking up that lore. And all of it is in service of making some awesome videos for you guys, but also, when I write my own fantasy, I wanna get inspiration from everywhere, from all kind of different classic fantasy, dark fantasy, grimdark, romantic, subversive, classic, all kind of stuff. Malazan, Book of the Fallen, someone mentions, absolutely. Chronicles of Prydain, someone says. Wheel of Time, classic. I haven't read every Wheel of Time. I was in a bookstore the other day and there's the 13th Wheel of Time. It's massive. I was, oh my god. Oh, Brandon Sanderson. There's a lot to do with Brandon Sanderson. I wonder how well this video is going to do. This is a weird one. Like I said, this is a weird experimental. I think people are going to jump in being like, oh my god, this is going to be an epic takedown, or like one of those rage bait political response videos. It's not really. I'm just being chill and respectful. Okay, before I wrap up, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Merlin recommends. Historical figure, yes, of course. Yeah. June, I still need to make June videos. I see your comments, Aegon II Targaryen, in all my posts and videos. I will do June Part 2 video. I will do animated June stuff. There's other stuff in a while. And then before we leave, thank you for the super chat from Glidus Hill, who I assume is none other than the bastard child of Glidus. What's your hottest take theory for A Song of Ice and Fire? Hottest A Song of Ice and Fire take and hottest A Song of Ice and Fire theory take. Two different things. Berserk, thank you, Flippy. I want to do Berserk. Also, I do, as a troll, I do kind of want to, like, wildcards would be fun. Gentleman Bastards, yeah, that's meant to be, like, Renaissance fantasy, right? Thank you. Wildcards would be fun. Imagine, like, wildcards animated. I just go through every single one. Anyway, yes, sorry. Hottest take for Song of Ice and Fire. So my hottest take, I might actually repeat Quinn's hot take that he said on Twitter, which is that Brienne and Jaime, Beauty and the Beast, that pairing doesn't work romantically. Like, actually having them hook up in a romantic or sexual fashion would be terrible for that arc, for both of their arcs, and I completely agree. I hate the idea of them hooking up. I hated it in the show. In season 8, everyone was mad about Jaime abandoning Brienne, and she's crying, and he goes back to Cersei. That all sucked. But I was like, the actual sex itself I don't want. This doesn't work for me. In terms of my hot take for, like, a theory, like, what theory do I actually believe in that other people don't like? What's a controversial theory that I like that other people don't? Is it the big mecha Hightower Gundam fighting against Euron's Cthulhu Eldritch being and recreating Pacific Rim? That could be it. That could be that's definitely going to happen in the beginning of Winds of Winter. First page, the prologue. It'll be from the point of view of the Eldritch Beast. Okay, yes. I think I'll wrap up now. We've reached the stage of the live stream where I'm just kind of... I'm vibing, I'm winding down. I think it's time to end the stream. Okay, well, thanks for watching. This was really fun. This is really awesome. I'm sure the comments will be really normal and not weird at all. Thank you for being chill and civil and awesome in the chat. I've got a Patreon if you're interested. I've got merch at the merch store. We love a bit of merch. Some mugs. Who wants a Fancy Haven mug? Fancy Haven t-shirt? You kidding me? Best thing ever. And yeah, stay tuned for future live streams and videos. I'm so bad at ending live streams because I want to keep chatting, but I've got to have some dinner. I have some chicken, I think. I have some lovely chicken. All right, bye everyone. Love you. See you next time.